When we haven't been lost in a COVID fog, we've been looking for signs everywhere. When will this be over? Is that vaccine ready yet? What did Dr. Fauci say today? The coronavirus pandemic may be the most watched pot in the world, and one that is sure taking a long time to boil. We need some kind of sign, don't we? Today's gospel is all about signs. The people of Palestine were a people who were looking for signs. They lived in the press of Roman imperial rule. High taxes and only potholed and dangerous roads to show for it. Their local authorities were a sham too. A cruel and bloodthirsty regent manipulated a religious hierarchy that thought more highly of themselves and their own lot in life than they did of the people that were in their care. Just like us, the people of Israel were neck deep in it before Jesus arrived on the scene. In the crush of desolation, we humans turn to meaning making. We identify signs of hope. And if we're paying attention, God's promise is revealed. Today's gospel is also about the messenger, John the Baptist. Our scripture does something interesting. It invites us to see that signs are nothing without the noticer, and messages are mere babble without the messenger. John the Baptist fits squarely in the prophetic tradition in this way. The prophetic tradition is what scholar Walter Brueggemann expands for us by pushing us to see that sign reading and message delivering is a form of imagination. In this opening of Mark's gospel, the prophet Isaiah is directly quoted. "Behold, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you. He will prepare your way. A voice of one crying out in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths." The basic formula of the prophet, the messenger, is simple. The world isn't right. It has to change. Mark's text is written to a community weighed down by taxation, by phony leadership, by daily violence, by false government. They're tired, and rightly so. They know it in their bones. The world isn't right. It has to change. Yet, there's something significant about this guy. John is not the Roman official. He's not the puppet king, not the temple hack. This is an outsider. John literally hangs out on the outskirts of town in the desert. I imagine that this helped him to keep his head clear of the chatter. He's a little bit out there, untidy, maybe a bit too much adrenaline, and yet so captivating. The irony of this spectacle of John the Baptist is that he's not pointing to himself. Biblical scholars tell us that eating locusts and wild honey is a kind of code. Locusts point to another prophetic text, the book of Joel, and their presence is the sign that things are changing. God is turning the tides. Wild honey calls to mind the promise that God made to the wandering Israelites after their departure from slavery. The promise is sweet. We will taste it. God and good will have the final word. John the Baptist is the sign. The messenger is the message. Our salvation isn't to be had in the distraction. It's in the community that good people build on the outskirts of town. John builds a community of believers on the banks of the Jordan, and they wait in expectant knowing that God will make good on the promise. The waters of John's baptism tide us over for the rush of the Spirit that God's entry into the world will bring. On my walk today, as I prayed, I ask myself, who in my life is the sign of God's coming, of a better world right around the corner? And in my imagination, one person emerged, and then another, and then another, and then another. A community. Ask yourself, who in my life is the sign of God's coming, of a better world right around the corner? We identify signs of hope. And if we're paying attention, God's promise is revealed.